Thank you for staying with us, everyone. Let's dive now into the significance of Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi's visit to 4 African nations, including Nigeria. He met with President Tinubu yesterday. Staying with me, we began this conversation some 30 minutes earlier. Former Nigerian Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations, Ambassador Sarki. Thank you so much for staying the course on the program. So Wang Yi's visit, we understand, marks the 35th consecutive year that the Chinese foreign minister has chosen Africa as the first port of call in the year when it comes to diplomatic relations. Talk to us about what this says about China's strategic priorities and how Africa fits into its global agenda.
Well, thank you very much for really visiting this very topical issue. After all, it was only yesterday, less than 24 hours ago, when the Foreign Minister Wang Yi met with His Excellency President Tinubu and with the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Yusuf Tuggar. So it is very topical, very important for us to recall the relationship between China and Nigeria in particular, and Africa in general. But before doing so, I think Nigerians would maybe should know why China made it a point of duty in the last 35 years or so to entrust the visit of the foreign ministers to Africa as the first port of call, and it has become a ritual now. Now, in 1989, the Tiananmen incident took place, whereby young people, students, protested against the government. And the government of the day, I think under Premier Le Pen, did not accommodate those so-called fresh spring, that the students wanted to bring into China, governance and politics. And so the protest was ended in unhappy circumstances. Because of the nature and the way the process was suppressed, the Western governments used that as an excuse to isolate China. And they prevailed on many countries, especially in the Western ideological camp, to really refrain from having meaningful contacts and relationships with China, such as visits. But African countries, they saw the reality behind that was an internal affairs of China. Why should we not have relationship with a country like China? African foreign ministers, African diplomats visited Beijing, and the Chinese felt obliged to really reciprocate that gesture by reposing more confidence and trust in Africa. And one decision that came at the highest level of the Communist Party was that each year from 1990 or 1991 thereabout, the first trip the Chinese foreign minister should make to any part of the world should be to Africa, to show our solidarity, to return this confidence and gesture that they showed us. And it was in that spirit that every year, in the first or second week of January, Chinese foreign ministers ritually came to Africa to visit 3 or 4 countries, different parts of the continent. So this is just by way of history.
Indeed.
But going back further, China's ties with Africa, modern communist China's ties with Africa, went back to 1963-64, when Chu Enlai, that illustrious prime minister of that country, visited East Africa, North Africa, and West Africa, and visited Ghana in 1963 and 1964. And over and above that, in 1955, the Bandung Conference, held in Indonesia, established the political framework for liberation of Africa and the rest of the world, Asia, and the political engagement of the so-called southern countries, and the birth of the non-aligned movement and so forth. So it was in those spirits and traditions that these visits are taking place regularly. Mr. Bunti.
Absolutely. China, no doubt, has been investing heavily in Africa's infrastructure development. We've seen significant cooperation in areas like trade, technology, and energy. And we've also seen what has been termed the potential benefits all around. But I'd like us to talk about the drawbacks of these partnerships for African nations. Which stands out for you?
Well, if there are any drawbacks, they must emanate from the inadequacies of our own internal policies and programs, the way we manage projects, the way we manage loans and grants and other things. Let us remember that between the last 40 years or so, China was heavily reliant on imported capital, loans and investments from the West, particularly from countries like Germany, France, Austria, the United States, and UK. And that was how they developed their economy to be the second largest economy today, by actually importing capital from outside and also from the Chinese diaspora. Now, in our own case in Africa, whenever capital is imported into the country or into any country, the operation of that capital is rather opaque and also indeterminate in terms of its flow into critical sectors, whereby projects can be started and completed on time and delivered to the society of the country. So the fault, if any, should not be placed at the doorstep of the Chinese, but actually the way we manage those opportunities that are given to us by the Chinese in terms of loans and grants. So if you look at the relationship with China today, in the last 20 years or so, they have become the biggest trading partner of sub-Saharan Africa. And also, they are the biggest source of investment, particularly in capital projects, railways, ports, airports, construction of roads, cities, and so forth. So we should look at the advantages of those programs rather than focusing on ideologically driven opposition of those support that China has been given to Africa, which are largely being manufactured in the West and re-echoed in certain African circles. It's not very healthy, but it is a fact of life that everything has an opposition to it. But what matters is how do we manage those resources that are being pumped into our countries by China. But I'm happy that yesterday His Excellency President Bola Tinubu indicated that more needs to be done by China in terms of investment in Africa, particularly in Nigeria, by expanding two facilities. Number one, the FOCAC, China-Africa Summit meeting that took place in Beijing, whereby $50 billion was pledged to support Africa. He called for expansion of that fund, which is very logical because the previous commitment made in Johannesburg by the same Chinese president was 60 billion. So it was scaled down to 50 billion in the Beijing conference. Now our president is saying, please scale that up. You can do it. The second one is the really increase in the yuan component of the foreign currency, of the currency swap of 2 billion yuan between Nigeria and China to enable the facilitation of trade. So our president has seen merit in Chinese investment, in Chinese capital in Africa, in Nigeria. And I think we should also do the same by welcoming the commitment to Nigeria in terms of building our railways, our ports, our rails, and other things, and not to raise suspicions where they should not actually be raised at all in the first place.
The suspicions usually are rooted in concerns as regards the broader context of the new scramble for Africa that you mentioned earlier, with multiple global powers, including the US and Russia and other countries in Europe now vying for influence and resources on the continent. How should Africa be wary of potential new colonialism and ensure that its interests are adequately protected in this era of power competition?
Well, I think, our own disposition matters greatly. I can speak only in respect of Nigeria, but we can make references to other countries. In Nigeria, strengthening of our laws in terms of extraction of minerals, for instance, and the diligent application of those laws will mitigate any negative impact that Chinese presence or foreign presence, for that matter, might have. The strengthening of institutions and control of the regime of extraction of minerals is very critical. We have seen how Barrick Gold and I think, the government of Guinea or Mali are having some conflicts in terms of the share of the resources. One of the Australian companies, I think, is a Canadian company, is having 80% of the share in the gold mine in that country. And the country is only having 20%. And the government now is saying, no, that is not good enough. We want more of the percentage of the resources that you are extracting. So I think a look at our enabling legislation can help us to really focus on adopting measures to mitigate any negative fallouts of the presence of foreign actors on our continent. But I think this suspicion, Mr. Ogunti, that you are referring to, is largely driven by Western perception of neocolonialism and other things. They have no excuse, really, to tell us this, because in the last 60 years, they could not rise up to the task to invest substantially in building infrastructure in Africa. I will ask you one question. Can you tell me one railway line from one city to another in any country that was constructed by direct aid from any Western country? I don't know if they exist. Today, it's only now that the so-called, this railway line from Angola to DRC is being contemplated by the United States of America in return or in response to the Belt and Road Initiative of the Chinese government, whereby they have been building ports, railways, and other things. If you go to East Africa today, to Kenya, to Tanzania, to Ethiopia, the dynamics of economic development has been fundamentally altered by Chinese presence in those countries in terms of construction of railways, construction of seaports, construction of roads and highways, construction of industrial zones, construction of manufacturing facilities, construction of factories, establishment of agricultural research institutions and development facilities. These are game-changing innovations and changes brought about by Chinese presence in Africa. We haven't seen those things done by any Western countries. Rather, they prefer to establish military bases in Africa. Can you tell me anywhere where the Chinese have established a military presence to prioritize military occupation of any part of Africa? They may have an agreement with Djibouti in terms of coastal activities whereby the ships can come and go. I don't know of any other physical Chinese military presence in Africa apart from the peacekeeping endeavor that they are engaged in under auspices of the United Nations. So
I get your point, Ambassador, and one would think that the West should carry some moral burden considering the colonial role they played, in setting Africa back based on those experiences. But I also
the moral burden, Mr. Ogunti, they will continue to bear the moral burden until the end of time. It's not something that is going to end. So long as we Africans exist in this world and generations of Africans exist, that moral burden will be with the West. For 400 years of slave trade, for over 100 years of colonialism, for 400 years of colonialism in South Africa, and also other atrocities committed against our people. Let Nigerians, I'm happy that the Minister of Education and the government is speaking about the introduction of history in our schools. Let us go and read the history of colonialism in Africa today. It is not a happy incident. It is what has brought us to this situation today of racism, racial discrimination, and xenophobia against black people, of underdevelopment, of backwardness, of instability. Everything you can think of has a historical factor behind it. And these are the things that we have been battling with since independence for the last 6 years. I am not excusing our own inadequacies in terms of missed opportunities, muddled policies, and corruption and other things.
And leadership as well.
At the same time, the issue of history, which is like a millstone around our necks, cannot be disposed of. But I'm happy that we are realizing these things and making some changes. So I do hope that under the current dispensation in our country, pragmatic policies will be taken whereby the development of infrastructure can be the main priority of government and also to assist industrialization. I recall the interviews given by President Tinubu before he became president, his speeches on how particular emphasis he placed on industrialization. I really sincerely hope that his mind will not be detracted from the focus of industrializing Nigeria by really building infrastructure, building our power generation and distribution capacity, and also creating the enabling environment for injection of capital from countries like China to develop our industries.
Absolutely. Ambassador, we're wrapping up now, but I'll also love us to quickly explore the geopolitical implications of China's growing presence in Africa. How do you think other global powers like the US and Europe view its increasing influence on the continent? This visit, for instance, is coming just before Trump's inauguration, and we understand the sentiment that he has for China.
Well, I think, the perception of other countries about China's presence in Africa is of no consequence to us. It is of no utility. It is of no significance whatsoever. We cannot belittle ourselves to think of what others think before we act. We are independent continents, made up of 53 independent countries with our own foreign policy priorities and national interests. If engaging in China is a core national interest position, nothing should detract us from really adopting that position. After all, have we told America or the Western countries not to join NATO, for instance? Have we told them that they should reduce their rhetoric against Russia and China? Have we told them to really join our perception of really enabling the independence of Palestine and others? No, we do not interfere in their own position. So let them not dictate to us how we should perceive our friends, or who should be our friend or who should not be our friend. So global geopolitics is nothing but really position our countries to extract maximum benefits from the economic dynamics in terms of their relationship with other countries, particularly Africa.
Former Nigerian Deputy Permanent Representative of the United Nations, Ambassador Usman Sarki, who joins us live from Geneva. Thank you so much for your thoughts.
Thank you for having me, Ogunchi. Thank you. Have a very good day.
You too. And that's our show today. Thanks for being a part of it. We're back at the top of the hour with the news. Stay with us.